So in the book Moby Dick, one of the early scenes is a scene with this Father Mapple character who is kind of like, it's like a funeral scene, sort of. There's this chapel and there's all these plaques on the walls commemorating all of the whalers who've died. And Ishmael is sitting there and he kind of has this like, reflection of his future self is kind of narrating, and he's like, pity the people who, he reflects on the people coming there with no body to bury, and he just is speaking in a way from his own future loss of the cost and the weight of that, of not having a body to bury, which is really kind of interesting when you think about it. Like, why is it that a body, why is that, and so they're in this chapel, and all of a sudden this preacher arrives, Father Mapple, and he's kind of dressed in a prophetic kind of way. He's dripping sleet, and he climbs up a ladder into a crow's nest kind of thing, and then pulls this ladder up after him so that he's separated from the congregation. And then he starts to preach about the story of Jonah. But he starts this story from a very different vantage point than you typically do when you are preaching on Jonah. Jonah, almost every time that pastors preach about Jonah, they usually start with Jonah's calling, which was to go to Nineveh. And why does he avoid it? And, you relate to Jonah on some level. Like, the idea that there's a group of people that you don't really want to go and promote their well-being, I guess. So then, like, or preachers will start at the end with the scene of the vine. Father Mapple, he starts at the beginning with Jonah buying his passage on this boat, and he's like Jonah's running from God. Never mind why he's running. He's running. And how do you know he's running? Because he's willing to pay triple the normal rate to get on this boat. So people know he's running. And there's this line where it says, like, money can buy your way across any border, but a good pauper is stopped at every frontier. So, like, money can always pay your way across borders. Anyway, the kind of the focus is sort of like, what are you running from? And what is the moment when you know that you are running away? And he kind of brings your focus onto all of the sailors who, in the story of Jonah, he's on the ship, the storm comes up, they don't want to throw him overboard, but finally they like draw lots, and it's like, okay, it's you, and I guess we're gonna have to get you out of this boat. But the sailors are non-judgmental. They're a very non-judgmental group of people. And so it's kind of like this foreboding of, like, what happens when you meet someone who is running away from God, and how much danger they can bring you into in pursuit of their flight. And so, I think Jonah is sort of prefiguring Captain Ahab, and Jonah is like this really kind of annoying, whiny prophet. He doesn't want to go, and then once he gets there, he saves all these people, and then there's this like vine that gives him shade in the desert, and then it dies, and he curses God, and um, it just kind of ends with God like being chiding him for being so like self-centered and not caring about all of these other people, just being selfish. Um, so yeah, like when you first start listening to the sermon by Father Mapple of Jonah, you kind of know that there's something like you're disoriented because he's like, never mind the call. Call doesn't matter. He's just running. And so like, and he's kind of talking to all these whalers who are about to get on these boats, and many of them aren't going to come back. And he's kind of like, why are you getting on this boat? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And it's kind of like, at the end, he's stricken with grief, and he just is up in the pulpit, and he waves everyone away, and he just stays there in a state of mourning. And that's when you realize, like, oh, this isn't theatrical. Like, this guy is actually like grieving, and it's not for show. And so in a way, it's kind of like Ishmael's future self, caring, because what happens to a gay man when a tragedy takes place? He blames himself. So, and also there's all this debate about, first of all, like the homoeroticism in Moby Dick is basically like if your kid was hiding in the living room with a blanket thrown over them, like they're just sitting up on the couch and they have a blanket over top of them, like, I see you, right? That's how veiled it is. Pretty obvious, but of course it's just not totally perspicuous. So there's like all this debate about whether it's like really a relationship, but then I re-listened to Ishmael's interview to get on the boat and had some like interesting insights that came out of that. So that's my latest Moby Dick update.